Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Again, I'm Keegan Chetwynd, the museum director. So our speaker tonight is Benjamin Vinot Prefontaine. He's a colonel with the French Air Force. He is actually stationed here in Norfolk, so he is joining us locally. He's attached to the NATO contingent that's over here. And he's going to be talking to us tonight about a really kind of an interesting, if somewhat niche story about a set of French aviators who flew on the Eastern Front as part of the Soviet Air Force during World War II, sharing the experiences that were kind of unique to the Eastern Front that have become the stuff of legend, the frozen winters, the unforgiving mud. So this is going to be a really interesting opportunity to hear from the French perspective what this unit and its service meant at a time when France, in fact, had capitulated to the Germans and was essentially knocked out of the war. So Benjamin, I think we've got you over there. Are you ready to get started?
Yeah, I'm ready, Keegan.
Excellent. Take it away.
Yes, I would like first to thank you and Gerald for this opportunity to share with you the incredible story of the Normandie-Niémen. It started 1 month ago with a visit of the French Aviators in your museum I'm a member of, and I'm really proud to share it with you. So these actions of this French unit fighting with the Russians on the Eastern Front have a symbolic part, but they earned great fame, and the escadrille gained much esteem among the Russians. I'm not working for NATO, but it was my first combat squadron back in 1999. Not an easy day when you know that you are going to join this squadron, as you have to learn everything you can before showing up. There are going to be questions at the coffee in the briefing room. It was kind of frightening. I eventually became the flag bearer of the unit, this French flag being the most decorated, the highly most decorated in the French armed forces. The unit being the most decorated unit in the French armed forces, Army and Navy included, meaning that this flag is always first in front of every parade, even the one on the 14th of July in the Champs-Élysées in Paris. So this is why in early May 2000, I traveled by train to the Marine Land in Antibes, the French Riviera in the south of France, to represent my unit to what will be the last meeting of the Normandie-Niémen Association. On this day, in May 2000, 55 years after the end of World War II, they decided to disband the association as they were dying one after the other. So on this day, I had the privilege of meeting all the survivors of this great unit, still a spark in their eyes when telling their fighting stories on the Eastern Front. There were pilots, but also technicians, ground crew. The ground crew are often forgotten because they only stayed during the first campaign, the first summer. But they were one group, one team, and they were the French aces on the Eastern Front. So today it's really an honor to share those stories with you all in the USA. Thank you again. Regarding, I will use a PowerPoint. This is kind of a military thing, but I will walk you through the slides from 1939 to 1945 and a bit further as the squadron is still alive and kicking. As you may also know, there is not only one Normandie-Niémen squadron, but there's another one. There's a Russian Air Force squadron who is flying Sukhoi 25. And it used to fly near Vladivostok at the end of the 90s. So starting by the context, we'll look at how was the squadron created. Then we'll look in details at the 3 different fighting campaigns or fighting summers and the return to France, and take a look at what's left of them, take a look at their legacy. And it is huge. I really encourage you to take a look on the internet. If you Google Normandie-Niémen, there will be thousands of documents. Finally, you will see that there is first a political will, which is about resistance. At this time, France has to exist and to fight back from London. But this story is not possible without all these young men willing to give their life. Each history is going to tell the same. I will never surrender. I will fight for my country. To be honest, I gathered all these memories from my readings and my meetings, but I also extracted some parts of my speech from the internet, which is an information mine, a data mine. The Warfare History Network especially provided some very good insights in English, because as you may have noticed, this is not my native language. All right, let's go. So it all starts with a defeat. France has to surrender to Germany, and Maréchal Pétain, who is the all-winner from World War I, is installed as the head of the French government, which takes its quarters in Vichy, a town which is the middle of France. There's one general who doesn't want to surrender. It is General de Gaulle. He's a French army one-star general officer who was previously posted in the French government. He decides to install his headquarters in London, and on the 18th of June, he speaks at the BBC, encouraging French men to join him and continue the fighting. This is the picture on the right corner. This is what we call the Appeal of the 18th of June, and it's still celebrated in the French armed forces because this is the beginning. When you look at what happened in the skies of France, the defeat was not so great for the French Air Force. The French Air Force is very new. It was created in 1934. They lost the fight. They lost many aircraft, many men, but they also claim close to 1,000 victories against the Luftwaffe. And many of the pilots achieved more than 5 kills, already making them ace, even if the combat stopped. It's going to be a key issue, as some of them, the 8 first one, will come back to Normandy Squadron, and they will bring this experience in the fight. It's not going to change the war, but it's going to be very useful. So, as a result, in 1940, there are two kinds of pilots. They are either flying with the official Vichy government, which means against Great Britain and the Allies, or they are flying with the Free French Squadrons, which means with the British against the German, and France is divided, and its future is at stake. To be honest, these are very dark times for my country. If I may go to a personal side, I may recall my grandfather's story, just to highlight the fact that he's going to change side. He engaged in the Navy in 1939 to fight for freedom. He was sunk by the Royal Navy in Mersel Kebir in North Africa. Only 7 survivors on his boat. Then, after the Allies came to North Africa, he continued the fight with a French general, de la de Tassigny, and fought the German back until the victory. And this is the story of the Normandie-Niémen guys. Some were true fighters on the British side, and some were fighting against the British, then with the French again and with the Allies again. So let's go back to the Free French fighters. Many of these stateless pilots are the property confiscated by Vichy and sentence of death imposed on their heads. Defiant, they formed their own fighter and bomber squadron with the Royal Air Force, where they played an important but largely unsung part of the Battle of Britain. In this time, at least 13 French pilots were awarded the Bronze Battle of Britain bar for their services in the sky over England between July 10 and October 31, 1940. As you know, Hitler broke the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and started Operation Barbarossa on June 22, 1941. His aim was to invade Russia and to seize its huge natural resources. On this day, the French Vichy officials in Russia are declared persona non grata and invited to leave the country. In fact, they will pledge alliance to the London government and start to send intelligence to de Gaulle. There is an opportunity. Because de Gaulle believed that it was important for French soldiers to fight alongside the Allies and against the Germans anywhere possible. So when the Soviet Union was invaded in June 1941, de Gaulle declared, without agreeing to discuss now the depravity and even crimes of the Soviet regime, we must declare, as Churchill did, that we are very sincerely with the Russians as they are fighting the Germans. So he reached out to Stalin with offers of assistance and a request that his Free French organization be recognized as the legitimate government of France. Stalin broke relations with Vichy when Russia was invaded, but he edged about recognizing de Gaulle. He didn't think at this time that de Gaulle had much to bring to the table, and besides, in the summer and fall of 1941, he was really preoccupied with the German invasion. De Gaulle's relations with the United States were no easier at the time. After Pearl Harbor, de Gaulle offered to send a squadron of 3 French fighters to serve with the United States, proposing to call them the Lafayette Escadrille, or Escadrille de Lafayette, in honor of the American pilots who served with France in World War I. The US Army Air Corps turned him down. So there was no turning room for de Gaulle. He had to invest in every possible option. So the intent is to send French soldiers on the Eastern Front. In March 1942, he will decide that it will be a squadron and not an infantry division, because an infantry division is much harder to gather, train, and move to Russia. So they're going to be pilots. By September of this year, 1942, French pilots began gathering in Rayak in Lebanon, which was newly liberated from Vichy control. There, they were training on the Dowatine D520 and honed their flying skills, and they were also studying Russian. There were 14 pilots and 48 ground crew or technicians. The 14 pilots were 8 veterans from the Battle of Britain and 6 newcomers with different squadrons. We'll look into their profiles, personal profiles later on in the speech. The new force was known as Groupe de Chasse, which is Fighting Squadron number 3. It was the equivalent of a Royal Air Force wing with 3 squads or escadrilles in French. Though it would be a while before the new group was up to full strength. 14 is not enough. The call sign was Rayak, as it is still today, Rayak being the town where it's been created. To recall, all the 3 French squadrons were named after French provinces. So Groupe de Chasse number 3 took the nom de guerre or war name of Normandie. Normandie, now very famous for the beach of Normandy and D-Day. Its insignia, borrowing that of province of Normandy, included 2 golden leopards, one above the other, on a red background. Beneath the lion, a white lightning bolt will appear, but not before 1945, because it is the symbol of their future Soviet division. So at the beginning, you have Fighting Squadron, Groupe de Chasse number 3, Normandy only. For de Gaulle, France naturally came first. When visiting Joseph Pouliken, the first commander or commanding officer of Normandy, he remarked, above everything, when you have any decision to make, always ask yourself, what is in the interest of France in that matter? So there is really a political will, and there's going to be action and fighting. The squadron needs a boss, and de Gaulle needs a strong and reliable man with experience to deal with the Russians and to organize the conditions of victory. So he's going to choose Lieutenant Colonel Pouliken. Pouliken was a great war veteran who had been wounded as an infantryman. He then took up flying and completed 30 missions on a Brigade 14, a large biplane used as a bomber and for reconnaissance before the end of the First World War. He then flew 30 missions against the emerging Bolshevik in the Spanish War in 1936 and re-enlisted in 1939, but resigned his commission at the Army de l'Air before escaping to France and joining the Free French Squadron. He is very famous. He's not a pilot. He's a pilot, sorry, but he's not a fighter pilot. He has good, very strong organization skills. And he is very famous because in order to escape from the Vichy government, he walked 280 miles from Algeria through the North African desert in order to leave this country and join the Sierra Leone, which is on the western part of Africa, 280 miles on foot in the desert to continue the fight. And then he became the commanding officer of 3 units, the Alsace Fighter Squadron, the first fighter squadron with the Royal Air Force, then the Lorraine Bomber Squadron, the one who made the campaign from Chad to Libya, and then Normandy. So he is very skilled and very experienced. However, he's not gonna fly any combat mission with the group. There is a French boss, but there is also a Russian boss. And they were under the orders of the 1st Soviet Aerial Division, being in the 303rd Fighter Air Division, which was commanded by General Zakharov. General Zakharov, a tall and strong guy, was born in 1908, was alone in the world when his parents died in the 20s. So the Soviet Air Force became his own and new family. He has combat experience because he fought in the Spanish Civil War and against the Japanese in the 1939 Battle of Khalkhin Gol on the border between Manchuria and Mongolia. Although as a commanding officer, he was not supposed to fly, but not flying, at the end of the war, he would have 18 victories. So he was flying a bit. And this tall guy has been really the father of the Normandy because he's been there all the time. And the legend says that he cried when Normandy left for France at the end of the conflict. So the task is not very easy. You have your group of guys, 62 guys. They are in Lebanon and they must join Russia. So the next task was to get the pilots and the crew to Russia. It was decided that sailing from England or Lebanon or whatever to Murmansk was too dangerous because of the very active threat of U-boats, which were taking a very heavy toll on the Allied shipping in the North Sea. So there has to be another option. The route would take them from Lebanon to Egypt, Tehran in Iran, and then they would fly to Russia. In November 1942, 3 American DC-3s from Egypt were made available, and they took the group of 14 pilots, and the ground crews, first to Baghdad, then to Tehran. They were waiting. They had a good time there. They met a woman from the French embassy, and they were partying all the time, and they were waiting for the aircraft. And one day, Russia sent the 3 Le-2s, the Lizunovs, which is a Russian version of the DC-3, and they were flying to Moscow. By November 28, the pilots and the ground crews were assembled at their training center at Ivanovo. Ivanovo is a very small town, 120 miles northeast of Moscow. They were the team. They were representing France. Pilot Roland de la Poipe would later write, "As soon as we reached USSR in 1942, along with all my friends, I was not seriously listening to the conference organized by the political commissar. But all of us were strongly united by our determination to fight the Nazis, and that was all. Strongly united." Coming from Syria, they were not really ready for the extreme cold of the Russian winter. Temperature were minus 30 to 40 degrees below 0 Celsius, so it's snowing all the time. They were warmly and officially welcomed into the Soviet Air Force, which providently provided them with some winter gear. You see them with fur hats and big coats and fur boots also. They were assigned, the pilots were assigned to heated cabins with 3 or 4 men to a room, and their rations consisted of porridge, millet seeds, and an occasional bit of sausage with no origin. So the Soviet authorities offered their French guests the choice of using Land-Lease American or British planes, or the Soviet-built Yak-1. They didn't know what to do, and when consulted, de Gaulle told Commandant Major Pouliquin at the time to choose the best fighter without thinking of the country it came from. Pouliquin used the experience of the veterans from the Battle of Britain. There were three choices: the American era Cobra, the one you have in the museum, which was a poor fighter with the engine in the back. English Hurricane or Spitfire. They were a great fighter, but there were fewer spare parts, and they were really lacking on the front. And there was the Yak-1. The Yak, it had low pressure tires and distinct advantage on rough dirt runways. Though rustic, it was robust, efficient. It was wood and aluminum alloy construction, and it was very light. Unfortunately, the pilot was not well protected. There was only one bulletproof back seat and a front windscreen. One good point, on the other hand, was that the fuel tanks automatically filled with exhaust gases, as the fuel was consumed to prevent explosions. So, like an A-10, a pretty reliable and strong aircraft. Yak engine was very simple and familiar to the French mechanics. It was derived from a licensed French Hispano-Suiza 12 Yankee. Yankee is the design, and it's very similar to the Dawatin D520. The fighter showed a speed of 350, 360 miles per hour. Not the best, but reliable. The Yak weapons armament, including a nose-mounted 20mm cannon with 150 rounds and two wing-mounted 50 caliber machine guns housing 700 rounds. The Yak, it was everyone's first choice. To the story, it has to be known that the representative to General de Gaulle in Russia, named Albert Mirles, was summoned to the American embassy in Moscow in order to explain the choice to the American ambassador and the Air Vice Marshal from Great Britain. Again, you see that there is political pressure in the big game. Nevertheless, néanmoins, the French chose the Soviet rogue fighter and begin to fly. The Normandie Squadron was to be a part, as I said, to the 303rd Fighter Division of the Soviet First Aerial Army. As such, their planes sported Soviet markings. The Red Star was painted on the tail and on both sides of the fuselage. The French then added the Normandie emblem under the cockpit. The nose that spun with the propeller, called the spinner, was painted with the distinctive red, white, and blue tricolor flag, the French flag. It's not always shown on the pictures, but it's going to happen at the end of the first year. And all the aircraft were painted in white, but there was white everywhere. All the winter in Russia is white. Negative temperature, no navigation points on the ground. I recall pilot Joseph Risseau in year 2000 telling me the best way to go and come back is to look at the sun. You put the sun on your left side when you leave and on your right side when you come back. You use the timing, and you're not very far from your departing point. As a result, there are other airfields in the area. So some pilots are lost and they land on the other airfield and they have to come back. So keep also in mind that there were no radios on these Yaks. They were not reliable in flight. And at this time, the pilots were communicating with their hands and visual signs. The flight training was also very complicated, including that some pilots had lied about their experience. Everybody wanted to fight, so some of them at less than 30 hours when they were recruited and they wanted to fight, so they lied, but they wanted to be part of the adventure. So some were complete rookies, and with no flight and no flight experience in the fighters and no combat missions at all. They crashed some aircraft. Every time they crashed one, the Russians, the Soviets were sending new ones. But they had to be ready for the spring and to attack the Nazis. So there was a strong camaraderie, and all the other the experienced pilots were flying with the new ones to increase their experience and make them ready. Finally, in order to convince the Russian authorities, the commanding officer asked one skilled pilot to perform a show of aerobatics above the field. It proved to be decisive, and the squadron was sent to combat. But before that, they now had an Insignia, and I will read you the what say Major Puliken to his soldiers when they were given the first Insignia of the squadron. Officers, non-commissioned officers, privates from the 3rd Fighter Group, I will award you with the arms insignia of our Normandy group. You will wear it with pride and dignity. It will represent for you the image of France in one of its most beautiful and richest encounters. It will evoke for you the souvenir of a campaign which belongs to us, which is calm and comforting. In this moment, Normandy suffers particularly with German occupation. Bombardments, frequent combats have lieu on its coast and in its sky. Our thoughts go to that corner of France, with the 3rd Fighter Group will render honors on behalf of and carry its arms faithfully, with pilots glorifying the letter with the victories. It is an extract from the marching journal of Normandie-Niémen, but bear in mind that all these pilots, they are fighting for a country which is 5,000 kilometers away. They are the only allied unit on the Eastern Front. So the first campaign, you may know it is the same today, but the operational cycle in Russia is still the same. You stand by in the winter, you do a bit of training in the spring when it's able, and you have the fight, you combat when there is no more snow or no more mud in the fields, or when you have a kind of freedom of movement. It's a personal point of view, but I feel that Hitler should, in this perspective, have learned from the Napoleon campaign. Never attack Russia if you can seize Moscow before the winter. But it is as it is, and it was time to be engaged. The Russians didn't want to lose too many French pilots, so they asked that they only escort the Soviet bombers. There were Petlikapov PO2. The first mission were really of our interest. As a result, there is an official who goes to Moscow and asks that they fly real fighter mission, and it is agreed. The first combat mission takes place on the 5th of April, and they shot down they shoot down one Focke-Wulf 190. A great victory. But when you look at the story, 8 days after, on the 13th of April, they lose 3 pilots at a time, 3 on 14. And it's already a huge toll with 1 week of combat. And it's going to be a fight from the French commanding officer to still be involved in the fight, because the Russians don't want to lose the French squadron. It is a symbol, so they don't want to lose them. So from this point, France is sending every week, every 2 weeks, every month, some new pilots, because they have to reinforce the squadron all the time. The squadron is going to follow the Soviet army and move west of Moscow until it has no firepower and until it can't fight anymore. The squadron is also a part of the Soviet propaganda, and they are famous. And this is why Field Marshal Keitel, a German general officer, is sentencing them to death. They say, don't do prisoners. kill all the French pilots if they are shot down. The ambience, this is the ambience. And at last, at the end of this campaign, the French ground crew will be sent home before the 1943 winter. The conditions are too hard, and they don't know the aircraft so well. So the pilots are going to stay alone. So let's take a deeper look at what is the life on the front. As I said, conditions are very rough, and this is cold. Technicians have to run the engines every 30 minutes in the night. Every 30 minutes. To stay awake, some of them, they drink glycol or any kind of alcohol they can find. They couldn't remove their gloves to do intricate work for more than 10 to 15 to 20 seconds without suffering frostbite to their fingers. Really tough conditions on the mechanics. They always also needed an interpreter to work. It's not very easy to be efficient on the spot. There is a failure on the aircraft. You have to deal with the mechanics, explain the whole thing, and then go with the interpreter and then do it. The improvised airfields also are very primitive. Usually there was no electricity, no heat, no running water. Showers consisted of cold waters falling from a large can punch with holes. Accommodations were iffy, no better than the infantry. And obtaining food at a time when thousands of Russians were starving to death was a continual issue. They were living in wooden barracks, moving along the front, trying to hide from the night bombings. They were also fighting numerous pests to contend with: bed bugs, fleas, gnats, mosquitoes, tapeworms, and well, rough conditions. Food is very scarce and repetitive. It's always the same, except when there is a victory in combat. When you see victory, each pilot has an extra 100 millimeters of vodka and some eggs if available. And they are all supported by a Russian unit which is in charge of the food supplies and the entertainment. Because they also party, they party anytime they can, as they don't know if they will live long. So they often meet with a young Russian woman in the villages which are close to the airfield, and also sometimes with the Russian woman pilots when they land on the airfield. This is there is a picture in on the slide of the PowerPoint. It's another story. You will find it in the books, but I won't tell it today. It's a standard men to women story. At last, the tradition, and this is, I don't know if you know it, but the tradition is also to share the goods of the pilots killed in action or missing in action. When a pilot doesn't come back, all what belongs to him is divided between the one who are still fighting. You may feel it's a weird tradition, but bear in mind that the supplies are low, very low. So this pair of boots, this jacket, the headset, the watch, whatever, the letters, everything will be useful for the pilots who are still there. As I said, dark times for the squadrons. After Major Pouliken has done all the initial work with the squadron, the commanding officer, his deputy, is going to be Major Jean Tulane. And Jean Tulane is going to be killed in action in July 1943. So less than 3 months after the first combat mission. It takes place in July 1943. Normandy is involved in one of the greatest battles of the war. It is the Battle of Kursk. This battle is remembered as the largest tank battle in history. But it is also a huge battle in the air. To recall the numbers, the German amassed 1,800 aircraft, while the Soviets committed 2,000 planes. Look at the battle, thousands of tanks, but also close to 4,000 fighter aircraft. Based between Moscow and Kursk, Normandy sees action in the Orel sector, north of the city. When this fight was over, Normandy claimed 17 confirmed kills and several other need to assess, probable. But at the same time, they lost 6 of their pilots to enemy action, and one of them was Commandant Tulan. When he died on July 17, 1943, it was already his second flight of the day, and he was leading 9 yaks into the battle. Tulan was a very straight guy. He decided very early to leave the Vichy government, and he became rogue on December the 5th, 1940. He was posted in the Middle East, and what he did, he flew his Moran 406. I don't know if you recall, but the Moran 406 is the early French fighter for World War II. You can compare it to the Hurricane because it's not all metal, it's wooden metal. And he flew his Moran 406 into a cloud, he spun it down to low level, and he defected to Haifa in Egypt, where he enrolled in the Royal Air Force. He was already a major, but he was only 29. He became the commanding officer of the Alsace Free French Squadron in Great Britain. He was already a true virtuose pilot. And when he died, nobody found his body. His body was found 20 years after the war, and it is now buried in Russia. So very heavy toll on the first months of the war. The next commanding officer is going to be Pierre Pouillade. Pierre Pouillade was his wingman during the last fight, actually, and he was the last one to see him alive. A strong character. Before the war, Pouillade had commanded a French fighter unit in Cambodia in Asia. When the Japanese were invited in by the Vichy government in Hanoi, he was quickly tired of their belligerent and dominating attitude. The story says that the trigger event was when a Flying Tigers pilot was captured by the French and handed over to the Japanese and shot dead. He decided to leave the regular Vichy government. So he escaped to China in an old biplane that ran out of fuel as he landed. He ended the complete Japanese defense plan of Indochina to an American general, but it gave him no privilege, so he couldn't fight there. So he had to travel back to Great Britain to continue the fight. As a commander, Pouillade was a flamboyant character who has been compared to Gregory Pappy Boddington. Once, when grounding a pilot for forgetting to lower his landing gear and crashing the plane, Pouillade took away the man's poker privilege for 8 days. A strong remonstrance. But the very next night, Pouillade invited again the man to a poker game because he was short of a player. Another time, Pouillade had an affair with a married Russian woman. When her husband complained to the authorities, General Zakharov protected Pouillade from official criticism. So he was a lively man, and he was the man they needed at this time. So first campaign, what are we looking at? There are a group of friends united against the Germans, against the Nazis. Late in the fall, they transitioned to the heavier Yak-9 fighter, mainly designed for air-to-ground. They sometimes used a short burst of the internal gun to slow the aircraft after the landing because it was very, very heavy. Yet, It is still a combat unit with a hierarchy and more relaxed practice. And this combat unit has to stop combat because the death took a too big toll. At the end of the campaign, there are only 6 pilots still alive. On the picture, you see survivor from the first batch. Pouillade, the CEO, is not on the picture, but you see Lefebvre, Delapoipe, Béguin, Lefebvre, and Rissot. 6 survivors. There are other pilots who joined them, but only 6 from the 14. That's a lot. And they have to stand down, and it will last all winter. Like all the soldiers, the pilots appreciated their leaves. The mechanics were sent back to Europe. And leave, meaning they were living in Moscow in the Savoy Hotel, where they could take an actual warm bath, which was unavailable at the front. The Savoy Hotel is very famous. There was a big bear at the entrance. And sometimes their hotel phones would ring and the voice of a young Russian woman would offer to show them around the town. They knew that the young ladies were probably NKVD agents, but they didn't care. Lonely women and lonely men always find a way to get together. A nice leave, but there was still combat to be done. So the training began again in the early days of 1944, and the pilot in charge is a very experienced pilot. This is Marcel Lefebvre. In the spring of 1944, when the city of Alytus in Lithuania was liberated, the pilots often went to Sunday Mass at a local Catholic church. And General Zakharov was impressed by the piety of the French until he learned the truth. It was easier to meet girls in the church than on the streets. Always the same. There were no combat missions until the spring of 1944, and they were trying to have a bit of leisure. There would, however, be extensive training that would last until May, and the new airplanes, Yak-9s, arrived in numbers. Unfortunately, there was a series of accidents during the training in which several planes again were lost or damaged, and 4 pilots were killed. Marcel Lefebvre, I will tell you the story later, but he was one of them. Too bad. The actual combat began in late summer 1944. The squadron had now 47 pilots. So you see the strength down to 20 at the end, then 47 and 61 planes. They were following the very slow advance of the Red Army, changing stations very often. They had a political officer, and he was replaced, but a cruel one. And this time, the name is Voronin. He played hard games with the Russian NCOs and the privates working in the unit. And as a result, in this summer, a young woman named Nina, a secretary who was with the squadron, shot herself dead. And this story wasn't the greatest hours of the Normandy squadron, because the pilots were very angry against the political officer. By mid-August, the squadron surrendered all of its Yaks of different models, and they were replaced by 44 brand new Yak-3s. Yak-3s were the most capable of all Yak variants. The trees could climb up to 35,000 feet. The top speed was not much, 350 miles per hour, but they were equipped with improved radios. The pilots were able to communicate with the new ground-installed radar sites, and they were really better dogfighters, especially in low altitude, meaning under 15,000 feet. The nose-mounted gun was reduced to a 20mm cannon with improved stability. There were also machine guns in the wings, 12.7 millimeters, and of course, like all airplanes, the Yak-3 had its faults: limited range, less shielding again for the pilots, and a defective landing gear system. Still, it was an impressive fighter aircraft. Roland de la Poipe, who had flown Hurricanes in the Royal Air Force, would later write, with the Yak-3, we had at last a fighter able to compete with the Focke-Wulf 190 and the Messerschmitt 109. It was even outclassing them under 40,000 meters, 15,000 feet, where we were most often had to fight. In the first days of this campaign, the Luftwaffe was still strangely absent. A year earlier, the Soviets reckoned that 100 German planes a day were shot down. Now that number was more like 15. So the Soviet and French flyers focused on ground attacks. Using the nose-mounted cannon, they went out hunting for trains, depots, troops, road traffics, light vehicles, river barge. This was not without risk, and at least 2 French pilots were lost while attacking armed trains. They took part in the Niémen. I don't know if you know it, but Normandy is going to become Normandie-Niémen. Niémen is a big river which goes from Russia to Lithuania to the North Sea. And with all the other units, air and ground, they were awarded a prize. In Russian, the name is Prikaz, and Stalin awarded them this Prikaz. And then the word Niémen is added to every unit name. So the squadron GC3, so Groupe de Chasse Normandie, is now becoming the Groupe de Chasse Normandie-Niémen, and it eventually be a regiment, the only regiment in the French Air Force, and it's going to last forever. So Normandy to Normandie-Niémen, it's 1944, and because of the battle around the river Niémen. In the meantime, the Luftwaffe was gathering all its forces in the Königsberg area. Königsberg is now the Kaliningrad area, north of Poland and south of Lithuania. Civilian and military personnel were trying to board the ships leaving to mainland Germany. You can compare it to a Dunkirk escape with many civilians, thousands of people. And just before October, there were still 18 veteran pilots from the first campaign, and there were often some vacations. But they were fighters, and they saw that the final push would take place before the winter. So they all declined. They all said, I want to fight. And they stayed in the unit. And this is where the best part of the unit history is going to be written in less than a month. This is the Battle of Königsberg. And you must read, most of the writings are in French, but there is one book in English. But when you look at that, you take off, there are hundreds of aircraft in the sky protecting Königsberg, and they are fighting all the time. It can be compared to Battle of Britain for 1 month, very short time. On the first day of this battle, Normandy is going to shut down 29 aircraft on the first day. It's going to be 41 in 4 days with no loss, and they will shut down 100 aircraft in a week. And the total at the end came to 201 aircraft shot down in 1944 alone. And the unit at the end of 1944 is going to be the first Western unit to enter the German territory. It is East Prussia at this time, but the first Western unit to land on the German ground. And it was done. In December, most of the regiment boarded a train for Moscow, where General de Gaulle was on a state visit to see Stalin. All the pilots were excited to meet the man who had single-handedly redeemed France's honor. And at a special banquet, some medals were awarded to the pilots and some Soviet personnel who worked closely with them. And it was the time for the 18 veterans from the first campaign to take their vacation and fly back to France. But this campaign had a very heavy toll on the pilots. They really lost some pilots. The first one of them is Marcel Lefebvre. As I told you, he was in charge of the training of the second batch of pilots for the second campaign. He was a born veteran, and he died while he was training. He had left Algeria in 1940 with 3 other pilots, and but in the aircraft, he landed in occupied Spain instead of landing in Gibraltar. He was trying to rejoin. He was shot at by the Spanish, so he took off again and landed in Gibraltar. He was really a talented and experienced pilot, but it didn't help him when his engine caught fire in June 1944. He eventually landed the aircraft. He escaped the aircraft and the cockpit, which was in flame, but he was burned on the whole body. He was taken to the hospital. He felt the pain for 3 days. All his friends were coming all the time, speaking with him, and he passed away on June 5, 1944. The shame is June 5. He never knew that the Allies would land on the beach of Normandy on the next day, on June 6. He was from Normandy. And if you look at the picture of his aircraft, there is a small sign. This is what we call le Père Magloire. And le Père Magloire is a brand of Calvados. Calvados is a kind of brandy which is made with apple. And everybody was at the burial because he was a symbol of the first batch of Normandy. He left them with already 11 victories. He was later on awarded the Order of the Soviet Union. He's a hero of the Soviet Union. On this campaign, I have to tell you about another story. This is the story from Captain de Seine and his mechanic, Bielozub. The pilots, they were used to fly their personal ground crew in the back of the aircraft when they were moving from airfield to airfield. And on this day, Captain de Seine was moving his aircraft to a new airfield, and he experienced a huge oil leak, and he began circling above the airfield. He described his issue with the pilots on the ground, and he didn't want to bail out. He wanted to stay and save both him and the mechanic. There is a comic on the slide which really describe what's going to happen. The political officers says to the French commanding officer, tell him to bail out. So he is given the order to use his parachute, abandon the aircraft, and jump. And he refuses. And he starts to try to land a wounded fighter. He tries to make it 2, 3, 4 times, and he cannot make it. And at the end, he crashes, and they are both killed. And they are buried together, side by side, shoulder to shoulder. And this act of true friendship is known in every Russian school to these days. It is very symbolic, but meaning the pilots won't abandon the mechanic. There were also some kind of innovations and new ways of fighting the war during this campaign. It was the early days of what we were calling now close air support. Look at the picture. There is a Russian-speaking interpreter who is fighting with the tanks, and he has a radio, and he's directing the French fighter aircraft to their land or air targets. So a kind of close air support and a kind of GCI. GCI, ground control intercept, they needed some position of the aircraft. So some French were guiding the aircraft, the French fighters to the enemy fighters. And there were also some medical evacuation, what we call medevac. And they use the old Polikarpov PO2. You have it on the picture. You also have it in the museum. And they landed close to the Dawn fighter, and they brought the pilot back to the field, new aircraft, new fighting. One of the famous pilots who did those missions was Lieutenant Jean Depange. He was a rookie pilot from the first batch, not a fighter pilot, not trained as a fighter pilot, but he followed the unit during all the war. And he was speaking a good Russian also. He had begun the war in the Libyan desert with the Low-End Bomber Squadron. And if you read French, there is a very good book which describes his campaign from Libya to Russia. And the weather, I have to go back one slide. The weather now turned unpredictable, and with snow followed by fog or brief moments of clear skies. Sometimes the snow had to be shoveled off the runway before planes could take off. The squadron had also received a new CEO, Louis Delfino, who began to fly the war for Vichy. And he took over the operational duties from Pierre Pouillade, the CEO for 2 campaigns, who had gone to leisure with the other 17 other veterans. New mission, a new pilots trained when the skies were clear, but a few missions were flown until January 13th, 1945. It was the date where the Soviet offensive was resumed. As you see, we are no more in Russia. We are in Eastern Prussia or Germany. So there is not the big winter time with snow and mud, but only 1 month. And the campaign starts again. So that's why we are in January and not in April, May, or June like the other years. At this time, they were fighting against the well-known Jagdgeschwader 51 Molders. It is still a unit in the German Air Force today, and it was in March 1945. During this struggle, they were charged with cleaning the skies of the last vestige of the Luftwaffe. Their new forward base or airfield was so close to the front that the runways received incoming fires from the German artillery. A pilot, Georges Henry, with 7 victories, was scoring the last victory on April 12 during the 3rd campaign, and he was killed the same afternoon by a German shell on the airfield. The losses again reduced the regiment to only 2 serviceable escadrilles, but even with reduced manpower, they flew all the missions assigned to them. In the end, when you look at the numbers, almost 42,000 Soviet soldiers and an equal number of Germans died in the rubble of Königsberg to take this part of the country. And the war was over. It was May 8, 1945. What happens next during the next month is, okay, war is over, but you have to bring back the escadrille or the Normandie-Niémen to France. And Stalin give them 40 yak. Say, okay, this is friendship, let's give them 40 yak. And they start their journey to Paris. Pouillade, who is the former commanding officer, comes in just in time to fly the last leg from Germany to Paris and land in Le Bourget. Pouillade had an accident 3 weeks earlier, a car accident, and he barely can fly, but he wants to be part of it. And so they land in Le Bourget. It is the part of their fame, part of the legacy. And let's have a deeper look. Who are the pilots who are landing in Le Bourget? You have Delfino, the commanding officer for the last campaign. When you look at the pilot, you look at his aircraft, and he's the 00. You see it on the slide, 00 with the red star. He is a good guy. He will stay in the Air Force. He will end up 4-star general with the French Air Force, making with the 7 victories at the end. So he is leading all the 40 yaks into Le Bourget. Look at Joseph Risseau. He's number 1. So he's a flight leader at the end of the fight. Small guy. Very smart, very funny, always smiling. I met him, so I can tell. He had fled Algeria in 1940 with 2 of his mates on board the Squadron Simoun, which he landed in Gibraltar. Then he had started his fighting career in the Royal Air Force as a night fighter, and he had great navigation skills. At the end of the war, he's an ace flight leader with 11 victories, and he's going to end up as a general in the French Air Force. Number 4, Captain Robert Marquis. You will find many pictures of this aircraft. He's not one of the most famous guy in the Normandy, but you find pictures because he's a very skilled aerobatic pilot. So he's always fly the demo when there need to be a yak airborne with the Russians or with the French. 13 victories after the war, a tragic fate at the end because he's going to die in an air show during aerobatics because his passenger blocked the controls during aerobatics. Then take a look at Roger Sauvage. He's the only Creole Afro pilot with Normandy. Started in the French Air Force in the 40s. Under the Vichy government, he didn't fly any fighters. He was flying gliders. And he had great flying skills mainly from this period. He was a famous guy because he was the only black pilot. But he is also known as the Alytus lover, Alytus in Lithuania. He met a Lithuanian girl there, and he still has a daughter living there near Alytus. You can see the picture. He wrote his memories. He wrote a book, and he came back many years after to Lithuania to see his daughter, but also to give a wooden statue. Which is still today on the airfield in Alytus. Made an ace at the end, 14 victories. Now François de Joffre. François de Joffre is what we call a blue blood pilot. A blue blood is when you are from a royal family. So it is the DE middle name between François and de Joffre. He was sent to jail in the early 40s after a failed attempt to rally Gibraltar from North Africa, and he ultimately made it and was able to fight. He also wrote a book because he has a very special story. He became famous when he was shot down over the Baltic Sea in the early days of 1945. Shot down into the water. He spent the night in the cold water in January, the night, survived it. Worn out, he climbed on the shore. He was almost overrun and killed by the Soviet main battle tank, which were progressing along the shore. He was shot at by the Russian soldiers, but they missed him, and he was also saved by the Russian soldiers. So he's a true survivor. He wrote the book, and he earned, because of his story, the nickname of the Baltic Man. The legend, I didn't meet him, says that Stalin himself was impressed by the story because he survived one night, and once in Moscow, he kissed him on the lips. Soviet traditions. He made an ace at the end of the war, was in Le Bourget with 7 victories. And let's finish. No, it's not going to be the last one. Let's continue with what I would say is the most American ace of the French aviators. Marcel Albert. Marcel Albert, also a hero from the Soviet Union. He started as a ground crew, a car builder in the Renault factory near Paris. Renault is like General Motors, it's a French brand. This experience will really shape his character because he will always be closer to the privates and the NCOs than to the officers and the generals. He's a very quiet, very steady man, and he ended up with the most combat victories in the unit, 23 kills. After a short career as a test pilot after the war, when 2 of his planes caught fire when they were airborne, he thought they were sabotaged. He immigrated to the USA, and he ended up marrying 2 American women and started some business in Florida. He passed away in Arlington, Texas, in 2010, and today the Russian government is about to inaugurate a statue of him, a monument in Florida, when COVID regulation will allow. So, hero of the Soviet Union, the most American ace. And to finish with, yes, this is maybe the one I like most. This is Marquis Roland de la Poipe. Marquis meaning still of blue blood, very young, audacious, disruptive, and he was Lefebvre's best friend at the time. Like the others, he started serving at 19 years old. He left France on a Polish fishing boat from the port of Saint-Jean-de-Luz. Saint-Jean-de-Luz is on the southwestern part of France, near Biarritz, close to Spain. He is from a very wealthy family, but he can't live with the idea of being under the German control. He served in the Free French in Africa. Then he joined again the Royal Air Force as a sergeant. And as a sergeant, he became the wingman of Paddy Finucane. Paddy Finucane being the Irish ace with 32 victories. And he claims his first victory over France on August 22, 1942. So look at that. He's a sergeant in the Royal Air Force. On August 22, 1942, he's fighting over France and burning a German aircraft. On September 11, less than 10 days after, he is in Lebanon, in Rayak, joining Normandy with all his experience from the Irish ace. After joining Normandy, he took his time before his second kill, because his second kill is on August 31, 1943, 1 year after. And then, in less than 1 year more, he's gonna add 14 more kills on the front. He has around 200 missions on the Eastern Front, and he ended up as a flight leader in 1945. Always funny, always making jokes. He became one of the first 2 heroes of the Soviet Union with Marcel Albert in 1944, joined again by Lefebvre, I told you the story, and Marcel André also. After the war, he was an air attaché in Belgium and Yugoslavia. He left the French Air Force and joined the business world. He was smart, so he designed various plastic products. He's famous for the Citroën Méhari. So maybe for you Americans, the Méhari is not very famous, but look at the picture on the right low corner. It's a kind of a 4-wheel drive, which can go everywhere. Not float, but very famous in France. And as an entrepreneur, a businessman, he created the French version of the Marineland in 1973 in Antibes on the French Riviera. That's where I met him in May 2000. Marineland is the place when we have sea whales. He was still young and full of talent, really full of talent. I had one opportunity to visit Russia with him when I was the flag bearer of the squadron. He was with his 5. And it is the time when in 2002, there was a De Gaulle exposition on the Red Square, and the only survivor yak was sent to Russia, and a delegation of the squadron, and Roland de la Poipe was sent on the way. Pretty impressive. Regulations in Russia are strict, so when you are at the custom, you have to show your passport or whatever. When Roland de la Poipe is at the custom, The custom officer is welcoming him, opening the door, and he walks straight like a man, like a hero of the Soviet Union. Very smart. And I have to confess that we stayed kind of late discussing his aerial combat, kind of late, yeah. Drinking vodka, of course. And he also wrote his memories, and he was the one to write the last book, still in French, but the last book before 2010. A very good friend. So what is Normandie-Niémen? Well, Normandie-Niémen, 3 years of fighting, that's 5,240 missions, 4,534 flight hours. That's 273 victories and still 37 need to assess. Because you cannot compare this toll to the German way of counting the victories. If you want to have your victory, you need to have a minimum of 2 witnesses on the Eastern Front. 2 witnesses. On the 97 pilots, 42 are missing or killed in action, but there are also 35 aces. 35 aces. It is the highest scoring French group, and this is also the second highest scoring group of the Soviet Air Force. You have 40 yaks, a yak tree given by Stalin, but if you look at the picture, what do you see? You see just young men who became aces and heroes. This is an esprit de corps. All the pictures, I just photographed them, but they are from the service journal or the daily journal. You can find it on eBay. There are few of them, but they are full of surprise. And in the drawings, what you will see, you will recognize them. De la Poipe, Risso, De Joffre, and they are hunting, they are fishing, they are playing, they are doing athletics, because they are not fighting every day. The weather is awful, and this history has also some funny parts. I also wanted to share the only pictures, the color picture of the yaks I know. They are from Joseph Risso collection, and you see 2 options for the yak. You see the one still with the red star and the white lightning bolt added in 1945, but you see also number 1 in the left. After they went handed over to the French Air Force, the red star is disappearing. There is no white bolt, and the yak are joining the French Air Force. As I mentioned earlier, there is only one survivor. This is Dash 18. Dash 18 flew until 1946. Then it was given to the Air Museum in Le Bourget, Le Bourget airfield, famous for the air show in Paris. And it is now painted as aircraft number 4. So remember, Robert Marquis aircraft, the aerobatics guy aircraft. And when it was restored, you can see that 18 is also 25, and number 2, and also number 18. So it wore some liveries. So it was the past, and now today, what is Normandie-Niémen? Really, I would say a living legacy in military aviation for the French Air Force, but for the world. There are monuments in France and Russia, schools, squares, streets, parades. There are books, comics, propaganda movie, model kits, paintings, profiles, stamps, warbirds. And today there's one webinar, thanks Gerald, thanks Keegan, one webinar on the way. Monuments everywhere, in Russia, in France, big statues commemorating this war, 1942, 1945. Look at the books. As I said, French Eagles, Soviet Heroes, the only one in English, but there are many others. Comics, If you read French, I would say let's start by the one on the upper left corner, Normandie-Niémen by Yves Courrière. That's the gray one. Un temps pour la guerre, a time for war. It is the Bible. You have the service journal on the left low corner, and then the three Icar. Icar is a monthly review with some good memories. But there are also 7 books written by the pilots themselves. Roland de la Poape, Roger Sauvage, François de Joffre, Bon, Perret, de Saint-Phal, and de Pange. What's interesting, if you start with the whole story, then you will have some very personal insight with all those 7 books. The bond is very strong with Russia, so there is one movie, but it's a propaganda movie. To be honest, it was paid by the French communist government. You can find it on the web and look at that, but look at how many times there were some new posters from this movie. And there are 2 versions of the movie. There is a French version, and there is also a Russian version. And there's going to be some more. There is a project of making a series of 6 to 8 new series about Normandie-Niémen before 2025. It is. If you like model kits, every scale, 170 seconds to 132, 148, French, Russian, Revell, many model kits, profiles all over the world, the web. Look at them on the left side. This is the first campaign. So Yak 1, white and camouflage with the spinners, with the French rounders, the red stars. In the middle, second campaign from Yak 9 to Yak 3. And on the right side, the Yak 3s with the liveries, the most famous ones. Most of the profiles and the paintings, they describe these yaks. So the one with the red star, you have the white bolt, white number, and at the end, instead of the red star on the tail, they will wear the what we call the Lorraine Cross, the white Lorraine Cross, which is the emblem for all the 3 French fighter and bomber squadron in the Second World War. Again, profiles, pictures. What it's very specific. Look at the picture. Look at the profile. It's always the same. So it's the source. Paintings, as you see, of actual combat all over the web. Stamps with General de Gaulle all the time. Warbirds. You have one in your museum. They are, and again, traditions. It's all about the past and the legacy and the image of the only regiment in the French Air Force. All the other are groupe de chasse or escadron de chasse. There is only one regiment, and this is Normandie-Niémen. The last of the veterans. If you look at the picture, it's taken in Le Bourget. Le Bourget in 2012, and you still have 6 Russian mechanics alive who came to Paris. And the last veteran, the last French veteran, passed away on December 14th, 2019. He's the last to pass away, and there are still 26 bodies still missing, buried somewhere in Russia. All about traditions. Normandy is still alive today. It flew some other aircraft. Look at the Mosquito. I would suggest painting the Mosquito in Normandy colors, of course, in the Military Aviation Museum. Choice is yours, Gerald. I find the Chartmouth very sexy, by the way. They also flew the Mistral, which is the French version, and the Vampire on the left lower corner. Vautour, which is the first French night fighter, and one aircraft which I like, of course, the poor opponent to the F-16 and the European market in the 70s, but I really like the Mirage F1, F1C, true air defense fighter, and F1CT, the multi-role, because I flew them, of course, so aircraft of my life. And there is this friendship with Russia. And even during the Cold War, these are pictures which were taken in France in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000, every decade. There are the Soviet, the USSR fighter squadron, they were coming to France, meeting with the French fighter pilots, not flying, not at the beginning, but at the end, yes, and meeting. And it is kind of the way of a French diplomacy. You don't break the link you have with your friends or with your enemies. And enemy or friend, more friend than enemy today, they came to France. So you see, MiG-21, MiG-23, a bit. The story says that the MiG-23, when they came to Reims, the place where they do champagne, they had no radars, so no spying possible. So they had some lead in the nose. But also MiG-29 and Sukhoi 27 in Reims and Colmar. And today the squadron is still alive. I took some pictures from the last two anniversaries. The picture I like most is the one on the left corner with 2 Rafale and 2 Mirage F1. At the time, I was the squadron commander of the F1 squadron, not the Normandie-Niémen, but I wanted to keep the squadron badge because the Normandie-Niémen was to fly the Rafale soon, and I wanted to take this picture. Actually, I'm the pilot with the photographer in my back seat. So I look at the same picture. I didn't take it, but I was flying there. Very famous squadron, always celebrating. Look, the Red Star, the lightning boats, and it is a squadron who has seen combat still in Indochina, Africa, Kosovo, Libya, Syria, and today it is still on a combat tour in Jordan. So roughly that's the end for me tonight. I'll be very happy to answer any question, and thanks again, Keegan, Gerald, and all the volunteers from the Military Aviation Museum. Great place to be a volunteer for this opportunity, one of a kind in my life. Thank you very much.
Well, Benjamin, thank you so much for shedding light on this incredible story. Folks, if you've got questions, please don't hesitate to enter them into the question window. I will do my best to get those addressed. But Benjamin, tough sell on the Mosquito. I suspect that will be a tough one to to get across the finish line. But it is obviously an incredible airplane, and couple of questions have come in about that, not about the Mosquito, but more in general about the squadron. You mentioned there's a large number of missing in action remains still to be recovered from Russia. Is there a French equivalent to the Department of Defense efforts that you see the United States doing to recover remains from World War II? Do the French do the same thing? Is there an active kind of research arm that's trying to track down those remains and repatriate them?
Yes, we don't have the same means because France is a smaller country, but it's still active. And when we have the opportunity, we do that. We also still service all the burial and the graves of the French pilots in Russia, as do the Germans in France. The thing is, today, I'm not quite sure that we will find them again, because as I mentioned, Marshal Kettel sentenced the French pilots to death. So I'm not quite sure that we will find the remains of those people, because when you look at the German traditions at the time, but it was time of war, some were just shot on station and left as the unknown soldiers. So I feel it's going to be complicated. Most of the bodies, they were found back 20 to 30 years after the war, but it's been a long time where they didn't find anybody again.
So we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, and even in the email that went out to everyone to let them know we were going to do this, that it's a bit of an unknown story in the Western world. It's a massive story, though. Can you comment on how much is it unknown just because the materials aren't available in English. When you and I started talking about this, you shared with me a book from your collection, French Eagles by John D. Clark, and I've been reading it. That's one of the very few English sources. Have you given any thought to what it would take to translate all of this, or is that kind of work happening in France, or is there really not an interest in the story being more broadly known?
I don't know if it's going to happen. There might be something to do even in French, because Normandie-Niémen is the Bible, and you could do a 1,000 pages book with that. I don't know if it's going to be of interest for the French. The thing is, the most literature you will find on Normandie-Niémen is in Russian. And today, the memory of this squadron, and this is weird, but it is as it is. I mean, in Russia, there are hundreds of schools, squares, streets named for Normandie-Niémen. And I've been in Russia many times. If you say, I am a pilot from Normandie-Niémen, everybody will gather around you because they know the story. They know the story because it is the only unit who helped them to save their lives and to free their country. And I don't feel this is okay. I will take a comparison with that is the Yorktown battle. I didn't mention it, but I am a son of the American Revolution. My ancestor was in charge of the food supplies for all the Rochambeau army in the Battle of Yorktown in October 1781. This story is known in the USA, but it isn't in the French history books. And it's a shame. And it's a shame. So to sum it up, I would say we have an issue with history in France.
Thank you for the perspective on that. I think we're always curious to see, which stories matter, and oftentimes they can be eclipsed by other things that are going on in the sort of popular memory of different cultures around the world. We often think of the battles on the Eastern Front as like a series of these big cataclysmic engagements. You mentioned Kursk earlier. Did the unit have any role to play in the other famous battles, Stalingrad, Leningrad, any of those kinds of places?
There were famous places. I still have my PowerPoint on the flag. If I go back, when you look at the flag of the squadron, the name of the battle are there. So there is Orel, Smolensk, Orche, La Berezina. La Berezina is also a river. This is the one famous from the French Napoleon campaign. Berezina in French is a defeat, a mess. Niemen, Intersburg, Königsberg, and Pillow. So they were the battles of the Normandy. If you look into battle, one thing I didn't mention and which really impressed the French pilots was the shaping on the ground. The Russians, they are famous for what they call Stalin orgs. You see the piano you play in the church, and this is ground-to-ground rockets, and that with artillery, they were shaping the ground for weeks. So for weeks, every minute, every second, they were shooting artillery rounds and rockets at the ground. So it was so noisy that the pilots couldn't sleep. And after they started marching with thousands of troops and the fight. And they were shaping during winter time because you don't need a clear blue sky to fight. You can do it with the low clouds, and you continue shelling on the enemy.
Definitely, they were famous for their use of artillery. We've had a couple of comments here indicating that there's a series on Amazon Prime that comes out of Russia called The Attackers that includes some of the stories of the French pilots as part of that television show. So that's just a kind of more general piece of information for everyone to have. Benjamin, the yaks that went back to France, only one of them ended up in a museum, as you mentioned. Now, what happened to the others? It was a pretty significant gesture that they were allowed to return home with these airplanes. What did the French Air Force do with them after the war?
The squadron was posted near Paris after the Second World War, and they continued flying. There were more pilots coming. The thing is, look at but it is still an issue with warbirds today. When you look at how many hours can an engine run, maybe 100, and then you have to service it again, but with no spare part, that's not okay. So as I mentioned, it had also some landing gear issues. So day by day, week by week, the aircraft were not serviceable anymore, or they crashed, and most of them crashed with no landing gear, and it ended up as there were no aircraft. And the last flight was to be precise, I have to look in my notes, but I feel in July 1947. And because the squadron was famous, there was one given to the Musée de l'Air, which was on the same airfield. But the other were scrapped because they were made of wood and a bit of metal, and everybody needed that. And it is really the fate of every aircraft. At this time, I think you could have a yak for free, or for a few, not euros, but francs. Not today, but it is their fate. They crashed, and they were not serviceable, and they ended up with just one survivor.
It's very fortunate that it did end up in a museum, and that it has all those different markings underneath the layers of paint, because it just shows that, you know, that airplane had a story to tell with that squadron. Obviously, we've got a Yak 3M here, so this story is kind of true for us here as well. It's something that we always like to tell, the more in-depth stories behind these airplanes. Can you speak to the gear that the French pilots received? Were they selected and favored for better quality gear than other Russian units because they were the only Allied unit flying on the Eastern Front? Or did they receive just the same treatment as everyone else?
No, they received completely the same treatment. And it was great, because if I go back in the slide, when they came, if you look at the picture in Lebanon, when they came with their gear, let's go back. Wow. This is the standard uniform. But when they come, look at Joseph Risseau on the picture. He has nothing. I mean, he doesn't have boots. He just have a standard French Air Force jacket, and it's not okay because they are fighting during the war. So you need boots, you need fur art, and it was the first thing. When you're looking at minus 30 degrees Celsius, it's really a nightmare. So they couldn't survive, and they were very happy to get that. But they customized it. Let's go back to Marcel Lefebvre. When you look at the picture right there, which is very famous, you see the fur art, and they use the Free French, what we say FIFL, Free French Squadron on the badge. So they always wanted to represent France and to kind of customize their dress. You see him with in this famous picture.
Another question that's come up a couple of times from different listeners is, how was the French versus the Russian language used operationally and in off-duty times amongst the squadron members?
They had to learn Russian. As I said, during the first campaign, there were no radios, so in the air they were not speaking French. But when they had the radios, and it was a mean for the German to spy on them, because they were the internal communications in the patrol were in French. So the Germans were listening to the frequencies, and they knew where the French pilots were airborne. Meanwhile, on the ground, at the end of the war, they were all speaking Russian. So the veterans most because they have spent 3 years, 2 or 3 years in Russia, but they needed it because they wanted to talk with their mechanics. They also wanted to talk with the ladies. So they were learning fast.
Always a great incentive when you're totally immersed in a language. Benjamin, can you maybe speak to any thoughts that were given to expanding this contingent? There was obviously a steady stream of people interested in joining the squadron to be able to overcome losses. Were there ever any discussions about sending more French resources to the Eastern Front based on the success the squadron was having?
Yes. There was a plan in 1945 to open a second squadron on the Eastern Front, but the war stopped the idea. The main challenge with the newcomers was where were they coming from, and there were two groups of people, and every time you look into literature with the French pilots, as the country was divided, occupied and free French, the old guys who fought the Battle of Britain and who have been fighting with the Royal Air Force, they were not very keen to adopt some pilots who had some Britain aircraft down, who had some kills on the British aircraft, on the American aircraft. They were reunited, but it was complicating at the beginning. A bit of a political issue, but it's been complicated. When you look at the history of the French Air Force, it's also very complicated in North Africa when the Allies come in 1942, because nobody, one day you fight the invaders and the day after you want to fight with them. So it's a bit complicated. One thing I didn't tell you about also, there is, I'm not too well documented on the issue, but it is known that two of the pilots who were flying for the Vichy government, when they came to the Squadron Normandy, they started to fly together as a pair, and they declared many victories. And they made aces pretty fast. But one day and the day after, they declared a victory, and you needed two witnesses so you could share a victory. But their report was false, and nobody could confirm for 1 or 2 days or 1 week that they were they were actually scoring some victories against German aircraft. And it was discovered that they were lying. And this is not a very good time for the squadron. The pilots were sent back, only 2 pilots, but they were sent back. And I don't have their names. It's not very important, but they were sent back to Britain. So Squadron was famous, and there was always, I would say, another kind of the coin.
Benjamin, you mentioned that there's a complexity that goes along with French service during the war that extends into your own family also. Famously, the Americans going ashore in North Africa as part of Operation Torch were very upset that they had been shot at all day, friends wounded and killed by French soldiers, and ultimately ended up spending the evening in the same bar as the French soldiers, having notes handed to them about the skill and bravery they had shown on the beach and opportunities to improve their landing tactics for next time. It definitely rubbed a lot of American troops the wrong way, but I think we don't often have an opportunity to kind of understand the complexity of the feelings that you have fighting for one's nation, which has aligned with the Germans. What ultimately made people leave the Vichy regime and do otherwise, and what kept them in the Vichy regime for as long as they were and sort of drove that change? Can you maybe comment on that? I know it's a little bit it's remote to your own personal experience, but it mattered. It was a big part of the story of what so many of these pilots experienced.
Yeah, it is complicated and simple at the same time. I mean, and it's also an intimate part of my motivation to serve my country. I mean, your country is yours, and when I say you cannot surrender, is you cannot surrender. And today we are fighting combats in other countries. It's a bit complicated for the public to understand that. But when it is your soil, look at the time. Half of France is occupied by Germany. Then it's going to be France, all of France. You have no rights. You have a government which is no use, who is seeing Hitler, the invader, and the guys were fighting in 1939, 1940, and most of them, all their stories the same. They want to flee France or northern France because they were in Northern Africa because they took the aircraft there in order for the Germans not to destroy them. And the fleet was in Toulon, in south of France, but there was also some warship in Cairo, in Algeria. So there was the intent to start again. But the general officers, they had jobs and they were also loyal to the French government because this is the government. And today De Gaulle is very well known because he resisted. But at the time, he was isolated, sentenced to death by the official government, but also very isolated with Churchill and Roosevelt. I mean, nobody wanted to talk to De Gaulle because what did he represent? 1,000 soldiers, not an official government, no weapons. So just the idea that France had to fight back, and this is why I started with the appeal of the 18th of June. It is that there is a light. I mean, when your country is invaded, you cannot surrender. We have famous histories of resistance in French, and at the end of the conflict, everybody said he was a resistant. Hey, that's not true. They were resistant at the end after D-Day, when France was free, thanks to the American, thanks to the British, thanks to the Allies. But resistance in 1942, 1943, maybe it was a 1 month survival chance with the Germans. So not everybody was a resistant. And to resist, you had to go somewhere else. And this is the path they took. And that's why I wanted to start again when the moment when they said, okay, I'm done with this official puppy government. I'm not a puppet. I want to live and fight. And this is the free world. I won't comment on what was going on with Germany at this time, but 80 years after, I mean, they took the right option. And when you look at the toll, 97 pilots, a lot died, and they are forgotten. And today, so it goes with my commitment with the Air Force and my government and my service. But today, when you talk of these guys, it is the way to honor them and to remember them and to show the younger generation that you cannot surrender. It's not possible because you have to live for freedom. And at this time, I won't say the West is freedom and the East was not, but freedom was able, but with fighting. So you could gain freedom by fighting, and I like that, and I like what France is. I mean, today, because we've been fighting back for our country, but also fighting back when your country is destroyed, and when you want to come back, it's a bit complicated, and in it politics, in it government. And these are the values that I respect in those fighters, really.
I think it's something it's challenging for us all to understand, but I think having more information, more data points, and hearing from people who are closer to that experience and that interpretation of the war is how we can all seek some level of understanding of that. Benjamin, was there a risk to the families of these men? Did the Germans or the Vichy government lash back out at the families of pilots who took off and chose to fight for Free France, be it with Normandie-Niémen or with any other Free French unit?
Yes, there was, but to be honest, I don't know any history of families shot down. They were known, but they were not arrested and killed by the Germans or by the official government or by the secret police of France. I don't know this story really, and I feel it didn't existed actually. Because it would have been the first word of the pilots telling their stories. I recall Roland de la Poipe. Roland de la Poipe, his father survived the conflict. He was harassed. He was arrested, but he was not killed. So, and I don't feel it would have done any difference at the time for them. If you had a letter to threaten a pilot on the Russian front, let's see the time the letter is gonna take to come from occupied France to Russia, months. So I feel they needed this freedom to be committed to the fight and only to the fight.
I think that's a point well made about the difficulty of threatening someone who's basically isolated from the rest of the world. Yeah. The Eastern Front, logistical challenges all unto itself. I'm sure Mail did move very slowly. Can you speak perhaps a little bit about Free French squadrons that flew with the Western Allies? You had mentioned that there were French pilots with the RAF, that they had approached the U.S. Army Air Forces, early in the war and were rejected. But there are some units that fly, say, in North Africa after the liberation of North Africa. Can you maybe talk a little bit briefly about their experiences and in contrast to those of the Normandie-Niémen?
Yes. So still today there are three groups of fighter squadrons in the French Air Force. They are the ones who get the traditions of the First World War. So this is Seagon squadrons, Lafayette squadrons, 100 years of traditions. And these squadrons, they began the fight in 1939, 1940. And these squadrons, they were still on hold in North Africa. And when they wanted to build some new fighter squadrons, the thing was there were some experienced fighter pilots, but we had no planes. So to gain respect or experience, you had to go through the British unit. So at first they were all flying, even experienced pilots, in the British unit. And then you had 25 French pilots. And then you set up your fighter squadron. And then it is Alsace. Alsace is the first squadron, Groupe de Chasse number 1. And first is Île-de-France, sorry. Île-de-France, because this is the area around Paris. And then number 2 is Alsace. And then number 3 is Normandy. And then there is Artois. And then it goes on the same with the night, the bombers, mainly night bombers. So this is going to be Bretagne, it's going to be Lorraine. And they all wear the names of the French areas. And they are formed when they can get the aircraft, the mechanics, the ground crew, and all French. So with time, more and more French learn that you can continue the fight in Great Britain, you can continue the fight in North Africa, and they defect, they go there, they are enrolled, and it's growing. And 1942 is the turning point, because you have to reunite the Free French and the All French Squadron, and it takes actually 1 or 2 months for the generals to talk together and to understand who is going to be the boss of all the new Air Force. And it's going to be General Valin. And General Valin is only a 2-star, I recall at the time, but he's the guy with de Gaulle. And when he's landing in North Africa in 42, there is a 5-star French Air Force general, and he doesn't want to give the command of the squadron. And so it's a bit weird. And they all mix together. To be honest, there is a bit of fighting, even with the real fighting inside the squadron. I mean, the guys with skills on the British aircraft, they are not very well accepted by the guys who are fighting against them. So it takes some time, and then it all moves around. And at the same time, it goes with French Air Force history, but there is also a fight of survival from the French Air Force to the French Army and to the Army in general. It is not a lesson about air power, but air power from 1917 in Verdun. If you want to have the best use of air power, you need means at the same time and the same place and gain air superiority. And when you have air superiority or air dominance, then you can start your ground war. But at the time, in North Africa, there are not very numerous German fighters, so air superiority is there. So there is a plan that the new Air Force, or the reborn French Air Force, is going to be attached to the First Army and will follow the army and will follow the orders of the army. So you see, dual fight at the time. Who is going to take command? Is French Air Force still alive? Yeah, but will it be the French Air Force or the French air component of the army? And French air component of the army, I'm sorry, but it doesn't work, because the fighters and the aircraft, they don't move at the pace of the tanks, nor of the men. And you can strike deep into enemy territory. You cannot do that with artillery or with the rifle. So you need your autonomy. So it takes time, and then it starts again. I don't know if I'm precise enough on this matter.
I think that's a great answer. I think it's heartening for us all to know that no matter the circumstance, no matter how dire, and no matter the war, that inter-service rivalries still persist. We've just time for one more question here this evening, Benjamin, and it relates to the picture you're showing right now. It was the Russians broke with a tradition of painting, kill markings as your enemy's insignia. We see Japanese flags on American airplanes indicating the number of enemy aircraft shot down. The Russians broke from that, and you find a lot of stars marking their kills on their airplanes. Yet there's little German crosses on the fuselage of this airplane, seeming to indicate kill markings. Can you talk about how the French were different from the Russians in this regard? Is this a tradition they brought with them from their British units, or did the French do this themselves when they were initially defending the country of France?
I feel they took the traditions from the British squadron, because most of them were trained like that. But the idea behind that is that they wanted to be seen as the French, and it all goes with the de Gaulle idea. You fight the Germans everywhere, and let them know you are French. Let them know you are fighting for France. And it's different. I mean, difference is very good, but these markings, I see them as a motivation for everybody. Because today, not today, but when you wake up, you look at your aircraft, you see this black cross on your aircraft. Hey, you know what you're up to, and your mechanic. I've done that while I was engaged in different conflicts for combat deployment. But when you have your ground crew who is painting the bomb, is very proud of painting the bomb on the side of your aircraft when you launch a bomb or a missile or whatever, or a gun strafing, because it makes him part of of the combat team. You're alone. I mean, a fighter pilot is alone. You fly as a pair. You go there, that's 1,000 miles away. Then you come back and you drop the bomb. And then the mechanics, there is a kind of a gathering, and you earn respect, and it's that. And when he's painting, he's part of that. The same as painting or writing some names on the bombs before dropping them. I mean, it's a motivation for all the group, and the group. I'm telling much stories about fighter pilots, but I'm fully aware that the fighting group goes with the ground crew, with the air traffic controllers, with the guys who are servicing your jackets somewhere under the light at night because you need it to be repaired. This whole team, the fighter pilot, that's the edge, yes, but there is everybody behind, and this, to my mind, is very important, because today the story is about pilots, but it's about everyone. And look at those guys. I mean, you have Marcel Lefebvre in front of his aircraft. It's Le Père Magloire. So he wanted to have his personal aircraft, and they were personal aircraft with personal mechanics. And the ties, this bond of confidence, of trust that you have with your mechanic, is something great in the job, even without flying. I mean, he's giving you the tool to do combat, to kill somebody, to destroy. And in true confidence, when he says, that's okay, that's okay. And it is all in the picture, and the markings that I feel they are part of that. I mean, this is the winning team. And it's like in a sport team. I mean, everybody is wearing the same jacket, same numbers. There is a bit of fame, a bit of whatever, but all together. And you win a world championship, then you are the star. And everybody has 1 or 2 or 3 stars. And it's all the team. That's it.
Well, Benjamin, thank you for the perspective that you've brought to this whole discussion. The recording will be posted online on YouTube and made available to everyone who wasn't able to join us tonight. That hopefully will give people one more source of English language information about the squadron. And thank you very much for your presentation, the effort that you put into it. We know English isn't your first language, so we really appreciate you doing the whole presentation in English for us. We hope to see you out at the museum again soon, and hopefully conditions improve and we'll have a rerun of this presentation in person out here at the museum. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Keegan. Really a great opportunity. Really, and in these hard times with COVID, I feel it's very important to continue the job and to share those memories. Flying for military aviation, flying for aviation is great, and let's share it with the younger generation. That's the point. So thank you very much.
That's well said, Benjamin. Thank you so much, and thank you to all of you who've stayed with us this evening. Thank you all so much again for everything this year, and we hope to see you again at the museum soon.